Good evening and welcome. An extraordinary give and take in the U.S. Supreme Court today as the 9 justices spent nearly 3 hours wrangling with lawyers over questions of when or whether a former American president is immune from federal prosecution over acts taken while in office. The questions raised during oral arguments are more than academic, but instead sit at the center of the special counsel's criminal election interference case against former President Trump and whether a trial can happen before the November election. Mr. Trump claims absolute immunity from prosecution, something the court didn't seem inclined to go along with, yet conservatives on the court sharply question the special counsel's position as well. None of that stopping the New York hush money trial, which continued today for Mr. Trump as a key witness testified for a third day. Laura Jarrett has details.
Tonight, the U.S. Supreme Court weighing a monumental question that will decide whether the former president goes to trial for plotting to overturn the last election and when.
I think that the Supreme Court has a very important argument before it today.
Mr. Trump hoping to persuade the justices to find him immune from federal charges. His lawyers arguing the office of the presidency would be completely hobbled without that protection.
Without presidential immunity from criminal prosecution, there can be no presidency as we know it.
The special counsel's office indicted Mr. Trump on conspiracy and obstruction charges last year for his efforts to cling to power, accusing the likely GOP nominee of pressuring state officials to reverse the election results. Actions DOJ argues were for purely personal gain and cannot be shielded from prosecution.
There is no immunity that is in the Constitution unless this court creates it today.
The conservatives expressing concern if future presidents have no immunity for actions taken while in the White House. That could open the door to recriminations between political rivals.
Will that not lead us into a cycle that destabilizes the functioning of our country as a democracy?
The liberal justices troubled by the prospect of insulating presidents from accountability, raising a series of dark hypotheticals to underscore the consequences of adopting Mr. Trump's position.
If a president sells nuclear secrets to a foreign adversary, is that immune? How about if a president orders the military to stage a coup? That sure sounds bad, doesn't it?
I'm trying to understand what the disincentive is from turning the Oval Office into, the seat of criminal activity in this country.
The fallout over efforts to subvert the election results in 2020 stretching beyond Washington. In Arizona, a grand jury indicted several members of Mr. Trump's inner circle Wednesday, accusing them of falsely awarding the state's electoral votes to Mr. Trump, despite his loss to President Biden. The sending of phony slates of pro-Trump electors to Congress to disrupt the election certification on January 6th, looming large at the high court today as well, as the justices look to determine the line between a political candidate's actions taken for personal gain from a president's official conduct that could be immune from prosecution.
Laura, we heard a lot today. What are the possible outcomes here?
Well, Lester, there's any number of different scenarios that the court could take here, but it seems most likely, based on the questioning, that the justices will say that the former president is not completely immune from all acts, but he might enjoy some limited immunity for some acts, in which case they're likely to send this case back down to the lower court to do some of that work, to figure out where the line is, Lester. But of course, that means more delays, and it means that this case is not going to trial by November. Lester? All
right, Laura Jarrett starting us off. Thank you. And Mr. Trump's first criminal trial resumed in New York with more testimony from the former publisher of the National Enquirer about that payment to an adult film star. Here's Vaughn Hillyard.
On his third day on the stand, former National Enquirer publisher David Pecker told the jury he refused to catch and kill Stormy Daniels' story about her relationship with then-candidate Donald Trump. Pecker said he told his right-hand man at the Enquirer not to pay Daniels the $120,000 she was seeking because they'd already shelled out tens of thousands of dollars to keep other stories about Mr. Trump quiet. If anyone should buy it, Pecker said, it should be Donald Trump and Michael Cohen, Trump's former fixer. Pecker says when he told Cohen, quote, he was upset and responded that the boss, referring to Trump, would be furious with me. Pecker said today he believed Mr. Trump or his company had paid Daniels until Cohen told him in December of 2016 that he was the one who paid her. Prosecutors are seeking to prove Mr. Trump doctored internal business records to cover up that payment. Pecker also testified Trump was aghast when he saw Stormy Daniels on 60 Minutes.
Was it hush money to stay silent?
Yes.
Pecker says Trump called him. He said, "We have an agreement with Stormy Daniels that she cannot mention my name." Trump later denied knowledge of the arrangement. On cross-examination, Mr. Trump's lawyers challenging Pecker's credibility and business practices. At a campaign event earlier in the day, Mr. Trump addressed the testimony of his longtime friend.
David's been very nice. He's a nice guy.
Did you know about the payment to Stormy Daniels before the 2020 election? Pecker also testifying today about a payment his company did make to former Playboy model Karen McDougal to keep her alleged affair with Mr. Trump quiet. Pecker said he coordinated with Cohen because he was concerned paying McDougal could violate campaign finance law. So they worked up an agreement to pay for her contributions to magazines owned by American media, adding he believed Trump was aware of the payment. The prosecution asking Pecker, was your principal purpose to suppress her story so as not to influence the election? Pecker responding, yes, it was.
Vaughn, what did Mr. Trump's lawyers focus on during David Pecker's cross-examination?
Lester, for one, that Donald Trump was not the only celebrity who he helped squash negative stories for in exchange for good ones, but instead that this was a mutually beneficial relationship dating back to the 90s when Donald Trump was a celebrity here in New York City. Cross-examination will continue tomorrow. Lester?
Vaughn Hillyard, thank you. Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.